friends, it's just Martine and I'm here today to share my May reading stats. I had a pretty good reading month in May, one of my best of the year so far. So I'm excited to talk to you about all the things I got up to. My computer is going to be making its appearance in this. Sorry, not sorry, I couldn't find a good way to film this without it. So yeah, this is what we have. In the month of May, I read 27 books for a total of 10,545 pages, which should have averaged out to about 340 pages per day, but actually how many pages I read per day was 326 on average. There were a couple pages that I read in previous months for some of these books. That's why the total is off, but it all evens out across the months, basically. One of the reasons I say this is one of my best reading months of the year is because I read for 140.216 hours, which is like less than an hour different from my January time reading. And that was my best reading month so far of the year. So I was very close to that. And so I spent an average of 4.5 hours reading per day. I read with my eyeballs 31 out of 31 of the days, so 100%. And I read with my earballs for 20 out of the 31 days, so that's 64.5% of the days that I listened to audiobooks on. And it took me an average of about 11 days to read through a book, which is crazy because one of my books I started in January, so it was like 140 days from start to finish, and so that really pulled the average up, but I was reading through books pretty quickly. Moving on to some fun graphs, we have my genre graph. And my largest genre for this month is tied between sci-fi and mystery. Oh, look, and romance is the same percentage. So those were the three. It was actually a three-way tie: sci-fi, romance, mystery. I read 4 of each of those. I also read a couple classics, a couple contemporaries, several fantasy. Fantasy is still my top genre of the year, which is weirding me out a little because it's not my favorite genre. Again, I need to fix that. Read some dystopian, some historical, one horror, a non-fiction, a thriller, one true crime, my first true crime of the year, hooray. For fiction versus non-fiction, I only read 2 non-fiction books, so 92.6% of my reads for the month of May were fiction. So far, my percent of non-fiction for the whole year is about 10%. For book size, my shortest book was The Turn of the Screw at 121 pages, which you may notice is longer than my usual shortest book in the month, and that's because I had some pretty long reads this month, I won't lie, because my longest book was An Echo in the Bone, which I started in January, but I was only like 150 pages in, and it was 1,149 pages. I read most of it in this month, and I'm super glad I finally got through it. So my average pages per book was 390.56, so almost 400 pages, which is crazy. And here is my pie chart for book size. Most of them were medium. That's anywhere between 300 and 499 pages. 70.4% of my reads fit into that category. We also had a couple of small books with 18.5% of my graph, 2 large books, and then 1 chunky book. That was An Echo in the Bone. Chunky is anything over 700 pages. For star ratings, 4 stars definitely made up the majority of this pie chart at 63%. More than half of my reads were 4-star reads. I did have 1 5-star book, and I also had a 2-star book, but I didn't have any 1.5 or 1-star books. So I would say this graph is really top heavy, as it should be. And in fact, you can notice that because my average rating for the month was 3.7, whereas my average rating last month was 3.5. So it went up this month, which I'm very pleased about. For series versus standalone, most of the books that I read were standalones, 63% of them. The rest were parts of series. This month, I largely read from authors that were new to me at 63% of my graph. This makes sense because if I was largely reading standalones, it's more common that it's not an author I've read before, because the main reason I read authors I've read before is if I'm reading a book in a series. For type of publishing, per usual, most of the books that I read were traditionally published at about 77% of them, but I did have a couple of independently published books and 2 self-published books. Again, this category is always really hard for me to figure out, but I tried my best. For publication date, per usual, most of them were backlist books, and some of them were a couple of the oldest books that I've read so far this year, like The Tenet of Wildfell Hall and The Turn of the Screw. 77.8% of my reads were backlist reads this month, whereas 14.8% of them were from 2023, and only 7.4% were from this year, 2024, so that's only 2 reads from 2024. For age range, I largely read adult books at 74.1% of my reads. YA took up a good chunk too at 22.2%, and I only read 1 children's book this month, which is rare for me, I would say. For format, ebooks reigned supreme. I kind of talked about this experience in my 24-hour challenges, where I challenged myself to read 24 hours of each of 3 categories: audiobook, ebook, and physical book. Ebook is usually my largest category. This month was no different, with 55.6% of my reads being ebooks. 14.8% of them were physical books, so that's just four physical books, but one of those was a library book. I'll get to that in a second. And then I did read several audiobooks. I read 8 of them for 29.6% of my reading. So like I said, I was going to talk about the library, so let's talk about where I got these books from. Most of them I got from the Libby app, 66.7% of them, so about 2/3 of them I got from Libby. But I also sourced some books from some other places. So I had Kindle Unlimited for part of this month, so I read 2 books there. I forget what the other category is. I read 1 book in that category. I read 2 owned ebooks, which is not 0. I got 1 physical book from my library, that was Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. I borrowed a book from a friend and read that, and then I read a couple of owned books, although maybe not as many as I would have liked. I read 2 of those. Let's talk about some other stats. First, we'll talk about money related things. So I acquired 14 books in the month of May, but I only spent $12.50 of my own money on them for a couple different reasons. One, I still had some gift cards left. I also had store credit at a used bookstore. And then my mom did treat me when I went to one used bookstore and they had a 3-for-1 deal where you got 3 mass market paperbacks for $1. So she treated me for that. The rest of them were Dollar Tree books that I paid money for. So that was the $12.50, and you'll definitely see some Dollar Tree hauls coming up soon. So get excited for that. But because I use the library so much, I know that I save a lot of money by using the library. In particular, this month I saved $315.50 by using the library, which brings my total savings for the year up to $1,808.35. We're approaching the $2,000 mark. I'm really hoping to cross it in June, but we'll see. As for my other goals, my Goodreads goal every year is 52 books. I'm now sitting at 155 books out of 52, so I'm at 298% of my goal. I wish it had been over 300%. That just would have been silly, but next month, I guess. I had a goal to read 24 physical owned books. I've read 16 at this point, bringing me to 67%, which is 2/3 of my goal. And for where I am in this year, we're a little less than half of the year in, so I'm pleased with that progress. I also wanted to read 24 owned ebooks, and so far I've read 10, so I'm at 41.67% in this goal, so about right on track. Those are all the stats that I have to share with you today. I know maybe I kind of rushed through this a little. I'm leaving for a trip tomorrow, and so I'm trying to get a bunch of things filmed before I leave. But if you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below how was your reading month in May, and what are you looking forward to reading in the month of June, and subscribe for more bookish and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!